OK? Sorry, we've been talking about the protests. And I've been asking you, how do you react to the protests we saw yesterday? And you've been answering in Joe's. What we haven't really talked about is, you know, how do you police these protests? Because it's quite right, there were some scenes, people walking around with clearly pro-Hamas material, which is illegal. And yet the police have to be quite sensitive to the situation because, you know, they don't... Thousands and thousands of people are milling around. They don't want to escalate something into a riot, and they probably have to think about their own safety as well. But I'm no expert, but there is one man, great friend to talkTV, himself a presenter with talkTV, Peter Bleksley, former Met police detective. Peter, hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So I suppose that's my question to you, Peter. Policing these protests is obviously one challenge. The fact of the matter is, though, the police also have to give permission for the protests, don't they? And I'm assuming, obviously, they gave permission to that big protest. Yes, they said it could go ahead, but there were people breaking the law there. I mean, how are the police meant to respond?
Yes, it is a very, very challenging thing because the police want to protect people's right to protest. In fact, a decade or so ago, the police themselves had a huge protest through the streets of central London, which passed off peacefully, fortunately. And so they very much want people to protest properly, respectfully, and within the boundaries of the law. Yes, they almost license these protests to a certain degree, and they have lengthy conversations with the organisers. And in a very short space of time, just a week after Hamas entered Israel with such murderous intent, this pro-Palestinian protest was facilitated on the streets of central London. And credit to the police for that. They mobilised sufficient numbers of officers to, by and large, prevent large-scale disorder. And whilst 9 police officers got injured yesterday, and I wish them all the very best in their recovery. That's 9 police officers who probably couldn't contribute towards keeping the streets safe today. And 15 arrests were made yesterday. There will be more arrests. The policing of this protest is far from over. In fact, just 1 hour ago or so, for anybody who is on the social media site X, formerly known as Twitter, if you go to an account called @MetPoliceEvents, you will see they are putting out appeals there to help identify people who they clearly think have committed offences. So if you follow that account and you recognise that person or know anybody that does, you'll be doing a very good bit of public service.
Peter, is that in effect the reality of policing of an event like this? It's going to be after the event. And is that because it's easier to view evidence, or is it also because there's less chance of creating a situation that could get out of hand?
It's a combination of those things, and you've absolutely nailed it. Yes, there's a lot of video work done these days to try and capture video footage, evidence of people breaking the law, and also to be able to identify them. But of course, in this day and age, where we have so many people living in the UK who, quite frankly, we just don't know who they are, that throws up yet more challenges for the police. And there is that balance to be struck. Do they allow some criminality to occur? Do they video record it? Because to take positive action then, to make arrests, not only does that take officers away from the protest, but could it inflame something to go way beyond the existing criminality? And that is always a decision officers, not only on the ground, but officers watching from the operational control centre, have to sum up and make dynamic, often very important decisions in a fraction of time, in a very short space of time.
So let's take that example that's been going around a little bit. There were, I think it was 2 women, and they had pictures on their back that were clearly supporting Hamas, and there were some police officers near them. Shouldn't that have been a point of intervention?
Yeah, but look how inflamed people get, how tensions can rise when they see potentially male police officers arresting a female, in essence, for a public order offence. If there had been a threat to life or a threat to property, then I'm sure the police would have been more proactive. But sometimes, unfortunately, in 2023, the police have to think about the optics of things. Let's rewind just a couple of years ago when that young woman, Patsy Stevenson, was arrested at the Sarah Everard vigil. That picture had every front page the following day. The optics were not good.
No, they weren't. But Peter,
not painted in a good light.
That's a cracking example to draw, because the converse of that is, I'm sure some people watching this show would say, look what they will do when the police will do when there was a protest about Sarah Everard and that tragic case. But when it comes to protesters about who are basically blaming Israel for the attack on Israel, because that's effectively what they're doing, the police do nothing. There's a contrast there, isn't there?
There is, but let's remember, Rent-A-Mob were out yesterday. A lot of people were out there, people that I'm utterly convinced that 9 days ago wouldn't have known what a Palestinian flag looked like. And there they were, some of them yesterday, spouting vile abuse draped in a Palestinian flag, which they'd probably unwrapped the day before. Now, do you want to inflame people who are going there with a clear intent to be abusive and, if any opportunity arises, to commit far more serious criminality? Or do you want to say to yourselves, we've got them on video, we'll identify them hopefully, and we'll pay them a visit some days or weeks later and arrest them or serve them with some kind of notice?
You see, in a way, I mean, again, I do understand your point. From policing, we have a different type of policing, for example, to how France do. They would manage it very differently. Some would say they'd like to see that, and using CS gas to break up these sorts of things and so forth. But the Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Lawrence Taylor, he's basically was in charge of policing this weekend. It's interesting. He spelt out what the law is, and basically saying people don't have the right to incite violence or hatred. You'll know this, obviously. And the law is clear that support for a proscribed organisation, which is Hamas, is illegal. So he then goes on to say, anyone with a flag in support of Hamas or other proscribed terrorist organisation will be arrested. We won't tolerate celebration of terrorism or death. We will arrest. But actually, what he's really saying is we'll arrest them at some point in the future, isn't he? And I think that there's a bit of a comms issue there.
Yeah, quite possibly, and they need to make that clear. We know that often, unfortunately, police communications from their media department and their senior officers is quite frankly lamentable. And do we expect police officers to be great media communicators? Well, it's not really their job, and certain senior officers need to get a refund from any media training outlet that's trained them in recent years, because sometimes it is appalling. But just picture a situation, and this is part hypothesis, part based on what we know. If you see two women clearly displaying any kind of instrument which is in favour of a prescribed terrorist organisation, then yes, they should be arrested. But what if they are being overseen by a dozen, 2 dozen, 100 people who are essentially Rent-A-Mob, who have turned up that day spoiling for a fight? Do you want to give them that opportunity for them to see that they've got a reason to have a fight, then have something blow up completely out of hand, for innocent people to get injured, for more police officers to potentially get injured, and for the whole thing to descend into chaos? These officers have to make very instantaneous decisions on the ground, often with just like that, at the click of a finger, make a decision. And for that, I think from time to time, we need to cut them some slack.
No, I sympathies, I think, are with you there on that, Peter, although I think they need to do a much better job of explaining the police, that is, or what they're asking their police officers to do, and why, as you've explained, they sometimes have to handle these things not to everyone's liking. Long may they arrest those in the days to come.